From Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Tisha B'Av, the sources of comfort. Of course, Tisha B'Av commemorates the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And following Tisha B'Av, and perhaps throughout the holiday of Tisha B'Av, we begin to accept comfort, l'kabel tanchumim, to accept comforting words about the destruction of Jerusalem. And I'd like to understand, what are some of the sources of the comfort that we do have? I'd like to outline 6 different sources of our comfort. The first source of our comfort comes from a midrash of an Eicha Rabbah, where it says, Mizmor la'asaf ba'u goyim nachatecha, timur echal kodshecha. That there's a psalm to the psalmist Asaph, that the Gentiles have come into our sanctuary. So the midrash says, a song because the Gentiles are coming into the sanctuary? It should be a kina, it should be a lamentation to Asaph because the Gentiles are coming into and defiling our sanctuary. So the answer is that we're happy. We're happy when the Gentiles came in and destroyed the temple. You know why? And not on Yisrael. That he poured out his wrath. God was angry at the Jewish people and he poured out his wrath, not on the Jews. He did not, God forbid, destroy the Jews. But rather, he destroyed the temple, the structure of the temple in the Beis HaMikdash, just on the wood and just on the stones. That's one source of our comfort, is that yes, the temple was destroyed, but that's it. Not the Jewish people. That remains strong as ever. The second thing is that as much as you suffer, so too is the comfort. The Gemara says in Tainis, anyone who mourns over Jerusalem, he will merit to see the rebuilding. The more we mourn, the more we will ultimately rejoice. As it says in the prophet Yoel, that God will pay you back for all the years that the locust came and ravaged your fields. Whatever suffering we have will be paid back. Nachamu, nachamu ami, we say in Shabbos nachamu. We say in the Shabbos following Tisha B'Av, that comfort, comfort. God turns to the prophets and says, comfort the Jews double. Why? Since the Jews have suffered double punishment, therefore they need to receive double comfort. The more suffering we receive, the more we discuss, and the more we get into the terrible sufferings of the period of Tisha B'Av and the destruction of the temple, the more we find comfort in the fact that indeed we're going to be rewarded, paid back for all the suffering, measure for measure. And that's nachamu, nachamu, double comfort. The third source of our comfort is mentioned at the end of the series of Haftarot. You know that the Haftarot begin, God says, look, prophets, go out and comfort the Jews. But we say, the Jews didn't want to be comforted. Finally, after 7 weeks of negotiations and discussions, finally Hashem says, Anochi, Anochi, Menachemchem. I am the one, says God, I am the one who will comfort you. We're comforted from the very fact that we know that it's God who comforts us. Nachem Hashem Elokeinu. We ask God to comfort us. If God is going to provide the comfort, we have nothing to worry about. Everything's going to be great. As a matter of fact, the Haftarah, in this first Shabbos Nachamu, points out that Kol HaGoyim Kain Negdo. You might think, how are we going to be comforted? So many problems. We have problems from Turkey, problems from Iran, problems from Venezuela. So many different problems from Russia and China. What are we going to do? Kol HaGoyim Kain Negdo. We're talking about God here. God is the one who's going to bring comfort. And for Him, it's all like a drop in the bucket. God is the one who made the heavens and the earth. To Him, all the greatest obstacles, Yaakov, let me show, whatever is twisted, will be flat. Any obstacle, the great mountain is like a valley. It's like a plain. God can get cut through any obstacle toward our ultimate salvation and redemption. Anochi, Anochi, Unachechem. We're comforted because we know that it's God and all His majesty and power who is going to comfort us. There's another idea, it's mentioned in the Hichalot literature, the early mystical literature, that at the very time when the Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, That's when the Mashiach was born. The soul of the Mashiach, so to speak, was born at that time. And there's a notion that the Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av. It's mentioned in Orchos Chaim and elsewhere that there is this tradition, and therefore women used to begin to wash their hair on Tisha B'Av in the afternoon because they remembered that the Mashiach will be born on this day. Yes, it's a day of destruction, but the same day of destruction is also a time of great salvation. We know the story of Rabbi Akiva was walking, and when he saw the wolves passing through the Temple Mount, the Gemara says at the end of Makos, he laughed. When we see destruction, we laugh. When we see the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, we rejoice because we know that just as God promised destruction, they brought destruction, God promised comfort and will bring comfort. And it's from this very day of destruction will come our very salvation. The Mashiach himself will come from this very day. Itself will be his birthday. Number 5, we are comforted from the very fact that the funeral's over. As our Shalveitzah explained, during the various lamentations, it's like the eulogy, it's like a big funeral. And when the funeral's over, the eulogy's been given, and the grave is sealed, and the Tisha B'Av is over, then we feel this great release that the funeral's over, our mourning is over, and we're ready to move on to another period. Finally, I'd like to suggest our comfort comes from the fact that yes, during the time of the destruction of the temple, Satam Tfilati, my prayers were cut off. During Tisha B'Av, I can't even say the words, God, accept our prayers. Accept our prayers. We live in a period where, through the destruction of the temple, God did not hear our prayers. But as Tisha B'Av comes to a close, we get to Mincha, and we get to the next day, we say Titkabal Sotom, we once again get ourselves out of that era, out of that period, out of that notion that God doesn't hear our prayers. And we're reminded that God does hear our prayers. And when we see that God does hear our prayers, when we come back into the world in which we do have a closeness with God, we can depend on God. We don't live completely in an era where God has turned his back on us, but rather, God once again will hear our prayers. And as we turn away from the day in which no prayers can be heard, and we turn back to the period where we say, God, please accept our prayers, this is the greatest comfort, knowing that indeed, as we said, God poured out his wrath on the wood, but the place remains. That access to God in this world through that holy place, that remains, it's even when it's destroyed, it's still considered a mikdash. God will destroy the temple, but it remains a mikdash, it remains a holy place. And that too is a comfort. That despite the destruction of the temple, we still have access through that very place which is supposedly destroyed. Access to God, and that access brings us the greatest comfort. And that through the destruction itself, we will come to our greatest relationship with God. And one day yet, we will yet rejoice on this day, Tisha B'Av culminating with Tu B'Av. And with that, we'll have Avachti Chagichem LeEvel, and the Evel will turn to a Chag, and Mi'agol L'Simcha will go from sadness, ultimately, hopefully, God willing, speedily in our times, to joy. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion of Tisha B'Av and the sources of comfort. You join us each week, and also you can look at our archives, past discussions about Tisha B'Av as well. I want to thank Jason Lefkowitz for making today's presentation possible, and all comments are welcome. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.